Morning, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of our online forum under the Strengthening the Capacity of Community Broadcasting in Africa. My name is Yonela Ngogwana, and I'm from Broadcast Media Africa. So this industry program, we established as Broadcast Media Africa together with Tugwana Media. And if I had to give you a broad perspective and understanding of why we created this. So our goals are to essentially support professionals and practitioners across the continent, and to just ensure that radio broadcasting is accessible. In turn, so we also want to empower professionals and practitioners to create, produce, bring forward social impact content to the digital broadcasting framework. Broadcast Media Africa, together with Tugwana Media, have been able to view the continent as a country, which is what most of the global continents have done, is see Africa as a country. And through this platform, for example, and other capacity building activities that we embark on, such as data gathering. So we have created the platform to just make sure that there is a network of professionals that are able to exchange ideas, because what we've found is that Africa needs to grow together in order to go forward. If you notice, there are certain countries that may be ahead on certain elements and strategies where others can borrow and adopt those strategies in order to progress in their broadcasting space. If you had joined previously, we've had two other sessions, which is our first session under the program was looked at the regulation and frameworks of community radio broadcasting across the continent. And then from there, we looked at how these stations and community broadcasters can adequately resource their broadcasting stations, which brings us to what we are going to be discussing today, which is using podcasting to maximize leverage. Because as we have seen, especially now during the COVID times, is how everything is moving more towards digitization. Well, I am here to just pretty much just introduce the moderator and just give you a highlight of what the program is about and what inspired us as Broadcast Media Africa and Tugwana Media to come up with the program. And I really hope that it will be interactive and will get the audience to bring in their views and ask their questions to ensure that we do grow and progress as a continent. So today we have Mr. Rhys Torrington, who's the CEO of Tugwana Media, whom I have mentioned as our program partner, who will be moderating the session. So Rhys has, a field of experience also across the continent, where he's played a vital role in establishing affordable DTH TV services across the continent. And he also concentrates pretty much on commercializing startups, companies with strong emphasis on sales and marketing excellence. So I will be handing over to Mr. Rhys to just take us through, to actually tell us more about himself and the amazing work that he has done across the continent. And then he will be leading us into today's session. Also, just a brief note, after this session, we do have a 30-minute break. Thereafter, we'll have our second session for the day, which will look at how to make money from podcasting. Over to you, Rhys.
Thanks very much, Yonela. Good morning, everybody. I'm a bit amazed by the word amazing in terms of achievements, but never mind, we'll gloss over that, but thank you for reading the notes I sent you. Tugwana Media. Tugwana Media is a niche company. We're based in Cape Town and Johannesburg, though today I'm still marooned in London. So I've just closed the window so you don't hear the red buses going past the outside. But as soon as we're able to travel more freely, then I'll be back in Africa. And as Yonela said, what we're all about is trying to make certain that we are building capacity in really the media industry right across sub-Saharan Africa, from the base in South Africa, to try and make us much more self-reliant in terms of content, reach, audience, rather than just being a rebroadcaster of things that have been produced in Europe or the States or Brazil or whatever it happens to be. Of course, those things are going to be important. People love to be entertained, but we also need to be very focused on local storytelling and using natural languages to do that storytelling. So that's pretty much what Tuguana Media is focused on doing. And of course, it fits very well with this idea of podcasting and podcasting in the area of local radio. We've already started to get involved in community stations, be they TV or radio. And increasingly, the question that we get asked is, podcasting, should we do it? Why should we do it? Is it not a competitor to what we're doing? Is it not a different animal? Do I really want to jump into this animal's cage? I'm used to looking after elephants, and now you're telling me I've got another wild beast here called a lion. Can I not look after that? I'm a trained zookeeper. It's different. Why would I do that? And that's really what I'd like to explore today. Should we do it? Is it a good idea? Does it complement or conflict with community radio? And then secondarily, let's make the broad assumption that we've decided we do want to do it. How do we do it? What are the barriers that we need to overcome? And who's there to help us overcome them? So we've got a very good panel of experts assembled today. Some people who are doing it, some people who, from a regulatory point of view, think they're there to help us do it, but very often we think they're there to stop us doing it. And we've got some people who are toying with the idea of moving into the podcasting area and want to share with us some of their thoughts about why they would like to do it, and what they see as being the scary bits. So if I go around the people that I've got on my screen at the moment and ask them just to quickly introduce themselves, luckily I've got the two ladies at the top, so that saves me having to be politically correct. Farida, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, please. Hi, everyone. My name is Farida Idris. I am the commercial director at Capital FM Kenya. It's one of the leading English broadcasting stations in Kenya. We've been around for exactly 25 years, and we are known for, innovations and trend setting. We lead and others follow, and podcasting is a very vital next step for Capital FM. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about it, and we hope to be the market leaders when it comes to podcasting as well. So that's who I am.
Thanks very much, Farida. Violet, are you a pirate or are you on the good guys side?
I hope I'll be able to assist. My name is Violet Molite. I'm from ICASA, a regulatory authority for communications. Part of our work is to regulate the broadcasting, the telecommunications, and the postal sector. I was fortunate to start with, when I got into the regulatory space, the first project that we were involved with was the community broadcasting, whereby we developed the framework, the policy and regulatory framework for community broadcasting. Then we licensed the first community radio stations like your Josie FM. And what we have seen with community broadcasting, especially in South Africa, I find that most of the big radio stations, they get their people, community broadcasting is being used as a training field for the bigger radio stations. So I'm happy to be here. We, as the regulator, we are aware that the community broadcasting phase is changing. There's a lot of innovation, things like your podcasting, your streaming services. And I'm just glad to be here that we can share ideas and see if really, as the regulator, do we really want to get into the field of regulating podcasting or even regulating innovation to the extent that you sort of like kill the sector as a whole. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Violet. Thibaut Touch. I mean, I'm sure lots of people know of you already, but I'm sure you won't hold back in telling us exactly who you are and your interests in podcasting. I think Thibaut might have frozen on that screen. Can you hear us, Thibaut? We'll come back to Thibaut in a moment. Ndu, you're joining us from Nigeria. How are things over there? Perhaps you could introduce yourself and explain your interest in podcasting.
Thanks, Reese. Thanks, everybody, the rest of the panel. Like Reese said, my name is Nduweze Anyanwu. I'm the MD of Spectrum Broadcasting. We have 4 radio stations going on 5 very soon across different parts of Nigeria. And we're also into TV content development. Podcasting is something that's quite new, that's a bit new here in Nigeria, but it's gaining a lot of ground. And I think because we've seen that as a thing, we actually have started to kind of develop our own podcast studio. So by which we could, create our own content on podcasts and then distribute. And then by also helping other people who want to, go into podcasting as well. They could come in, rent our space, use some of our assets to develop content, and and then we can help them also distribute and promote it. So we're very much into podcasting, and the idea of it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think I got into podcasting because I started watching a lot of Joe Rogan, and I got into the whole idea of it. So it made a lot of sense to me. And I said, hey, look, guys, I didn't even have to tell them. We were just sitting down talking about different digital assets and digital content we could develop. And my programs director came in and said, boss, we have an extra room here. Why don't we just create a podcast studio here? And I was like, yeah, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Let's do that. And let's push it through, because there's a lot of benefits from that. Also, we're looking at it from a commercially logical point of view, from the sense that, podcasts are eating into our market as radio, as traditional broadcast radio. And we're like, we have to kind of step in front of that. And I'm sure Farida understands what I'm talking about. That's probably why you guys got into it. So same thing, same notion, and same spirit, essentially.
Super, thanks, Ndu. We'll come back to that. I nearly asked you 3 questions while you were talking, but I thought, no, I won't do that, because we'll derail where we're going. Thibaut, I see you're now back with us. Would you like to introduce yourself to those that don't know you? Maybe some. You're on mute, my man.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I try to get the best connection possible. We have a gaming expo happening right now in this room right next to me. We got a lot of e-gamers here at our studios at Touch HD. So there's a lot of bandwidth that's been absorbed to Fortnite and all these crazy FIFA games going on. But I'm excited to be amongst those who pioneered the space of online radio in 2015 with a colleague of mine who has the leading podcast in the country by the name of Gareth Cliff. We formerly were with the SABC, which is the South African Broadcasting Corporation, for about 14 years on radio. And one had to pivot in the space of podcasting and online radio simply because of the maximum reach you are able to access, but the flexibility of being able to tailor your content, and create in a community that comes from a niche market, where we have variety here at Touch HD of platforms where we have our motoring content. We do some amazing stuff tailored for money shows. We got some lifestyle programming. So the podcast for us is to narrow your content to a specific niche, of which was a challenge on a terrestrial platform, because you have this broader range of audience that you are assigned an hour or 2 to reach out to with all these commercial obligations that infringe on your content, where you can't express yourself on a traditional radio for more than 60 seconds without going to an ad break. So the commercialization of podcast, but the freedom that podcast afforded us was to be able to find a way to tailor our content without the burden of being burdened by commercial obligations and meeting some of the clients' clients' expectations, from a point of how best to execute your content. So we managed to do, for instance, one of our big partnerships right now is a hair product where we're creating podcasts directly from salons, something that a normal terrestrial platform wouldn't be able to afford you. And we moved from not just doing audio, but we are putting our podcast on video, which is what we call a vodcast. So the innovation at Touch HD, what we have tried to do is to merge the theater of the mind with the eyes to actually get to see how best we execute dialogues that vary from various, like I said, lifestyle products, especially in the current affairs space. We have field reporters. I've got a partnership with an organization called the MICT, which is more of an incubating program for young people who are in their 3rd and 4th year students. We got 25 students right now who are graduating next year that work at Touch HD, whom we regard as our field reporters. They're doing a lot of research on the ground for us. They collect content, and we are able to, by the power of an Android phone, let them broadcast themselves. So new age broadcasting is exciting for us here at Touch HD, where we're trying all kinds of things. We're trying all kinds of innovation, innovatory way of connecting with our audience. I know ICASA won't like to hear this, but we also migrating a lot of our traditional media audience into the digital space, because the power of an Android phone says you no longer have to have that appointment with a TV or radio set. At your convenience, you can plug into whichever content you want to consume. And that migration is happening to such an extent that there's the DTT, I think the conversation right now is the set-top box distribution in the country. We know that the SABC has delayed and missed. I think we are 8 years behind with that migration, but 2021, I've seen a lot of acceleration with not just the conversation, but last I checked with our former Minister of Communication, there was acceleration of creating set-top boxes to ensure that the broadcaster, which is SABC, is not left in the dinosaur age. So possibly we'll see developments, because I know that's top priority in the communications department. But Touch HD, like I said, is pioneering that space. And the current project that I'm excited about, we are hosting e-gaming World Cup tournaments, creating, building this community of e-gamers from all over the world, which is also becoming a bigger revenue generator from what started as a normal sport podcast, and now it's hosting its own events with big commercial partners. So we'll get to talk more about how we're doing it.
Great, thanks, Tiwa. It's a very interesting introduction as well, because it also takes us into some other areas that we hadn't perhaps thought about, like video and whatever. So we'll get into the subject matter now. At some stage, hopefully, we'll be joined by our colleague Mehdi from Uganda, who's with the regulatory body there, UCC. He's obviously, you shouldn't say this for a communications regulator, having some communications problems, but no matter. So let's get right into it. And my first question is, and it's an open question, but I'm going to start with you, Farida. Why would you get into this in the first place? I mean, Ndu already hinted to the fact that there's a commercial imperative here as a radio station. There's a cynical one that says, if we're not careful, this tsunami is going to overtake us and whip away our audience. I'm not certain if that's absolutely true, but it's certainly an element. But what's the driver as you see it, and also perhaps in the context of community radio as opposed to commercial radio, if there is a difference between the two?
I think when you mean community radio, you mean the marginalized, underserved kind of radio station, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just differentiate that. So Capital is not a community radio. We're a very urban, well-established radio station. Although in Kenya we have one radio station that's a community radio station, which is in Nairobi. It's called Ghetto Radio. And basically, they speak to people in the slums. So they broadcast in slang, they read their news in slang, just so that the connection is more towards their target audience. So in terms of community radio, I also feel like, we've seen the power of podcasts in speaking to the communities, simply because, the voices are less mainstream, but connect more to the people that they speak with, and they bring out issues that are more taboo to talk about, like gender inequality, social inequality. They talk about gender roles, mental illness, but it's packaged in a way that it's specifically for the target audience that's there. You know what I mean? So in terms of connectivity, I think this is a brilliant platform. You get to speak about things that you can't ordinarily talk about on your mainstream radio, because you have a certain program at a certain time that needs to talk about certain issues. So when it comes to community podcasting, this is the way to go, and get down to the...
Do you to some extent create a different community around the podcast, or could you do that? Would that be one of your objectives, to say, actually, we can do sub-communities because of a particular area of interest, and you use podcasts as a way of doing that?
We're currently doing it. So we have segmented our radio shows, the broadcast shows. So one of the things that we do is we do have the live radio shows, but after every live radio show, we take it up and we call it catch-up radio. So you're able to catch up with what's been going on, and there was demand from it. A lot of times you find that, especially people in the urban setting, they consume, all this information and radio on demand. So every time we run an interview with, a CEO or a politician or some of the guys who come to talk about, important things that affect the community, they would say, oh, send me a link to what happened. So now we have replicated that on podcasts. And then secondly, we have a section where it's just the normal podcasts that run on your Google Podcast and Apple and PayPal and all these other platforms. So we have curated a few shows. So we have a mental wellness show that people get to hear about mental wellness. We call experts to come and talk about it. It's about 30 minutes. We run it off peak hours at around 10:30 every Monday. And then we also get already produced shows from BBC, which touches on different aspects of life and stuff. So we know that podcast is at its infancy stage in Kenya. So we're trying to bring it very softly into the people, and trying to tell them that, this is it's like talk radio, but there's a subject matter to it, and you need like 30 minutes to 40 minutes to sit down and listen to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. I mean, and you've touched on one of the other things, and I'll ask Ndu his views on this as well, which is, are you looking at podcasts, at least initially, as catch up on demand, just the same way as perhaps you would do that on TV, or are you looking at it as being a separate program in its own right, different formats, different ideas that may or may not have been a radio show, or may not be retransmitted on the radio afterwards? What's your approach at the moment? Is it very much, as you've said, taking some shows that you have and then making them available at odd hours of the day to suit the listener, or have you started yet producing schedules of programs, podcasts that are purely with the podcast in mind and radio as second thought? And do you...
Sorry, that's for me, right? That's for me, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so honestly, to what we were thinking about was, initially what we thought about was we had a specific program that we felt on air, 1 hour could not, was not enough for us to do. So we wanted to do a longer form version of it. So it was basically catch-up radio. And then also we wanted to be able to kind of say more things that, our regulators wouldn't allow us to say on, live broadcast radio. So that's what we wanted to do. That was the initial thing, was basically catch-up radio. But then we started discussing, and I think it was a mixture of both. I think it even leans more towards having original content for podcasts, right? That we were like, you know what? We don't have time or space to do that on radio. And for a lot of things, a lot of times when we create programs for radio, we're very fixated on your traditional advertisers, right? Who would get involved in it. Whereas when you deal with podcasts, you have your traditional advertisers on regular radio, and also you have your traditional audience, right? But when you're doing podcasts, you have more leverage. You have like basically the whole world to listen to it, right? So you could have Nigerians in diaspora who can associate with some of the things you're saying, or Africans in diaspora, Africans in other places who may find it interesting. So we were like, you know what? At first it was just, catch-up radio. Then afterwards we're like, you know what? Let's develop more content that's actually just original podcast content. So.
And Thibaut, would you see that as being a valid way when you were looking at podcasting? Are you looking at that as a standalone venture, or is it pretty much linked into your radio output at the moment?
I think one of the big determining factor here in how content is consumed from our research, the idea of catch up is for those who have access to Wi-Fi, those who have no barrier to data costs, so they can engage and sit for 45. But the purpose of a catch up or minimizing a 3-hour show and remodeling it into a 40 or 30-minute dialogue is to say, here's the highlight of what you could have listened to over 3 hours, but because of the barrier of data or challenges with Wi-Fi, we have shrank this programming into 30-minute format. But ideally, our podcasts are standalones, where people who, we look at our analytics, we have a lot of engagement on podcasts that are relationship related, spiritual, and business. The youth, the young community still has challenge with engagement because data remains the biggest challenge, and it's the gateway to the success of podcast industry. There are, in 2021 alone, I can tell you of 10 new shows that just mushroomed from various celebrities doing podcasts in their own, in the comfort of their home. And you ask them, what are they, how are they reaching their audience? They're using social media as an extensive tool to access the market. And when you look at their numbers, it is a big threat for traditional media, because for you to have 10 people on Touch HD, it means you took them from an existing platform and they migrating. What do they do when they get there? You give them enough to stay. And our program, what we do, we give you option of a 3-hour programming and a 30-minute sort of catch-up format of a show. And what we realize is people who engage us with 30-minute programming, the analytics are so high, and the engagement is also quite high, which also makes us understand that the bulk of our listeners or the bulk of our audience are sitting in offices, because that's where the majority of South Africans enjoy free internet. So the future of podcast, I don't know if we are prepared to really give a true accurate answer until we can overcome this hurdle of data. Because until then, it's limiting to add all these existing variables to determine whether the podcast is a successful way or is the future of broadcasting, when the means on the play field are not even. Hence, traditional still thrives in South Africa because they have the advantage of free to air. And you have great properties on podcast that you will never find on traditional, but the engagement's still low, not because the property is not good enough or the demand is not there.
Are there particular themes that drive this? That some you would have expected and some that have surprised you when you look at people that have sprung up from nowhere?
I think from experience, the guests I've had in 12 years of my traditional radio were always limited to the idea of speaking on a public platform where you could have be censored by the likes of your BCCSA, which is your the broadcasting regulations in SA. But when you have them on Touch HD and they're here on the podcast, it's different. I've spoken to the very same person, asked them the same questions on two different platforms, but the answer was different. And what you realize is they tend to think a podcast is more conversational, and the inaccessibility, you break the barriers of that idea that I'm now sitting in a radio station. The podcast is, for us, has created this picture to our guests and our audience that these are true conversations, uncensored. And uncensored does not necessarily mean be negligent, be irresponsible. Uncensored is we have the freedom to express ourselves without being compromised or without being told that you are violating rules and ethic codes of a channel. So
I described to somebody recently, my view of a podcast was like eavesdropping on a conversation in a coffee shop at the table next to you. It's sort of that sort of thing, that you're not necessarily directly talking to the individuals. You're listening to a conversation that's happening. Is that the type of mentality?
You are that fly in the wall.
Yeah.
That has been privileged to catch this great conversation between two to three people. And that's part of the unorthodox approach to broadcasting that podcasters afforded us. And I really think because of that, people are now beginning to appreciate conversations that are, heard on podcast than normal traditional media platforms. And if we were, like I said, I'm going to keep going back to the epicenter of this breakthrough being access to data. We have great content creators in South Africa, and I'm sure the rest of the continent, but I still think the sooner we are able to combat this problem of exorbitant data prices, we'll have a fair play field where commercially brands will also make an informed decision as to where their ROI lies. I generally think for the 12 years on traditional media, I sold speculations. With digital and podcast, your numbers are accurate. I can't fabricate the numbers like I do on traditional platforms. So we need to start being scientific in really measuring true audience engagement than relying on these old dinosaur age, stone age means of determining where our audiences are. So I think we are on to a great conversation, the future of community radio station will also use this as a blueprint on how to evolve in running successful community platforms if they use the same methods and analytic measures that we're using on our podcast or on our digital platforms.
I think that's a super point. And let's hold that thought and come back to it a little later, because I know, Farida, you've got some views as well about how you should interact with advertisers and get the right money from them and other sponsors. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask Violet now, sitting there as the regulator, given what we've just been discussing, how do you view the role of podcasting and community broadcasting? Because I know many regulators, not just ICASA, have struggled in their mission to be able to nurture community broadcasting for all sorts of reasons. It's been difficult to get viable stations and keep them running. But where do you position, and how can you help podcasting as a way of getting community radio more viable as a commercial operation?
Thanks, Aris. To start with, in South Africa, podcasting is not regulated. So we do have community radio stations, community broadcasters who are also streaming their content. So we do not stop people from podcasting. We are aware of the challenges that our community broadcasters have. One of the major challenge is the sustainability of community radio stations in South Africa. Hence, in the white paper, the government's white paper, the government is aware that our community radio stations are not able to compete fairly with the commercial broadcasters because of the nature of the community framed. For instance, in South Africa, you can either be a community of interest or geographic community. So you don't have like a huge coverage as a community broadcaster. But from the regulatory side, I see podcasting as an innovation, and community broadcasters can actually go into that space without fearing that they might be breaking. That's why actually also streaming their content through podcasting.
Yeah, and just maybe I can turn to you and do, and just, I was interested in something you said earlier on, which is that you're making facilities available to people who want to come in and have a crack at podcasting themselves, as well as doing it off your own bat. For people who do want to get started, how do they get started? Is there a sort of a dummy's guide to podcasting that people can follow, or best practice? How do people get started in this? It sounds a great idea.
Right. I believe there's equipment, actually. I mean, technically you could just go online and search for everything, right? But I feel like all you need is a location, have a bit of it depends how you want your podcast to be, right? But you want it to, if you have a studio of some kind, it'd be nice, an installation where you could, cut out all the noise and everything. And then you just have your basic equipment, microphones, I don't think you need speakers per se, but something to a recording device of some sort. As far as Dummy's Guide, like I said, you can go online. Basically, it's just, you have to have a niche topic, I think, usually something you're going to talk about. And then I also think that to some degree, you want to be able to solve people's problems. Like Thabo said, they do a variation of different topics that do help people and do inform people. So you have to either entertain or inform people. That's what I think. And then you just have to have a niche. You have those, and I think you're pretty good, and then, as far as us and why we wanted to provide that service. So we felt if you're just starting off as a podcaster and you want to just find a location to come and do it, you could use our space. We could collaborate, have some kind of shared partnership, and I think that it'll also work, because then you could do what you want basically, and then we would just provide you with the facility and that way we'd have a sort of collaborative thing. If it's something that's more humanitarian, it's even better for us. We could collaborate in that sense and whatnot, and it's just by booking. You book your time, you come in, you use it and whatnot. And that's it. I hope that answers the question. Or
yeah, no, I mean, I'm interested because I think a lot of the podcasts that originally came out were almost self-promotion in a way. It was taking what people were doing on blogs online and then making them the audio output. But now I think this interest group and the communities is quite an interesting one. In fact, I saw a quotation the other day from somebody that they saw podcasting as being the great leveler, particularly in audio broadcasting, in as much as you could do, as you say, you could just set up in your bedroom, if you like, and put together a decent podcast and take on the SABCs of this world and put out something equally as good and equally, probably even more interesting, because it was focused on a particular area. I mean, what's your view on that, Farida? I mean, if you do that and you look at focusing on a particular area of interest, is that likely to attract or deter advertisers and sponsors to get involved?
Probably attract, you know. I mean, 100%. Like, for example, if you were to go and do a podcast in your local language, you know, Nelson Mandela once said, when you speak to somebody in English, then you speak to their mind. Or when you speak to them in a language that they resonate with, then you speak to their heart. So I think it's opening doors to a greater audience, a wider audience that's untouched at the moment. But we still have work to do, you know what I mean? The big telcos have to give us affordable bundles for people to gain a lot of, because what you see right now, like for example in Nairobi, a lot of people that consume podcasts are people who live in urban centers. All right, so they have Wi-Fi's in their homes. You can ask your neighbor to give you the password, and you know, you use it as a hotspot. You sit down and download everything. Then as you commute to go to work, or you're doing your exercises, or you know, you just want to unwind, and that's the time you listen to the downloaded podcast. So there's opportunity for it, but there's also work to be done.
Yeah. And what about an engagement model with advertisers? Have you got any experience of that as to how you can entice them to be more flexible in the way they look at using these?
So we have a model that we're testing out right now, and we're using the old traditional model, which is sponsorship. You know, within the podcast, then you get to speak about the brand. There's the tip jar model that's working very well with influencers. We haven't tried that yet, and we see influencers making in excess of $200, $300 off of their podcasts and off of the.
So how does that work, the tip jar model? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, you're not familiar. So it's a model that's been used in the States and in America. So basically you come out, you put out your content, and then you have a call to action number that people can send money to. So for example, in Kenya, we have a mobile money platform called M-Pesa, and you can send as little as 10 shillings, which is probably 8 cents in US dollars. You know, so it's up to you. It's your prerogative. If you feel like my content is good enough, then feel free to give me a tip at the end of, at the end of my session. So,
so it's post-event crowdfunding, really.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of that. The YouTubers do that a lot. Patreon and stuff. Yeah.
It's getting a lot of momentum, but you have to put in a lot of work, you know, to entice the people that are listening to you to love your content enough to put that in. So we do use traditional media, you know, concepts like sponsorships, stock ups, promo codes. Then the least disadvantaged one is the promo code, whereby if you get to listen a podcast, say, done by me, and the call to action is every time you go to the shop or you go online to purchase your stuff, you have to use the promo code. I think it works very well for the end user and the advertiser, but it's like very disadvantaged for the content creator, because people are different. Not everyone will use the promo code, you know, and yet they heard it from your podcast. So I think generally we're at a trial and error stage. And I'm actually really looking forward to see which of those three models would actually take shape and advertisers would jump on. Yeah.
Thibaut, have you got any advice and guidance on that?
I think I hate to embark on conversations that need more than 30 minutes, an hour, but Farida said something in one of the points she was making in terms of demographics and classes that engage podcast at a higher volume than your normal. All of it is related to affordability and the conversation of community broadcasting. What my sister Violet will agree with me is that community broadcasting platforms have always been there for more of your rural, unemployed group of people. And in South Africa, I say that because it relates to township, and township has the highest population of unemployed people. So to go on a journey and encourage people in community platforms to innovate to podcast, one thing you got to ask yourself is, 34% of unemployment in South Africa today, with a population of under 10 million people that are currently working. How practical is it to drive a campaign in areas where are affected the most in terms of poverty, to go and innovate their platform into a digitized media offering, where for you to consume that property, you need access to data? When you look at the significance of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have to remodel it in 2021. Data is as essential as shelter, if not more important. Because if I'm a refugee and I just arrived and crossed the South African borders, the first thing I'm going to do is I want to inform those back home in Kenya or in Nigeria that I've made it safe. And I need data to communicate that. No, we no longer have those what you call standalone telecom payphones. No. So we got to be careful in where we're going with this dialogue, because I don't think community radio platforms are prepared to remodel their offering in a version of a podcast if the majority of your audience still in their affordability bracket, data is the least or the most expensive commodity. So we got to bridge this conversation and not detach why some community stations will never succeed or will never manage to innovate to a podcast offering. But if you talk about the urban area of Johannesburg, I enjoy a community radio station called Hot 109.1. Why? Because they are within the northern part of Joburg, where you reach Sandton, Fourways. It's the affluent. Therefore, a lot of hot spots. You go to malls where they offer free data. But if I come from Alexandra or Soweto and I go into a free hotspot area, I'm not going to go in there and engage a podcast simply because I got access to data. No, I probably will go there and download the most essential key things that I need, so that when I go back, I've downloaded this amount of information, which I wouldn't be able to access offline when I'm back in my, township or less Wi-Fi area. And this is the reality with where this conversation on the future of community broadcasting, in how it plugs and innovates to podcast. So the role of the regulator here is very important in addressing these economic dire situations that the bulk of our audiences in this country, where they are. When you start telling them it's download the app or visit this website, it's a complete turn off. Even if you had Michael Jackson as the host, it's a complete turn off, not because they're not interested, but because the barrier to entry is still there and it remains. So I really would like to see us having a version 2 or the second chapter of this webinar, where we bridge the regulator's responsibility with how we are combating this big virus of expensive data that is hindering a lot of content creators from thriving. And being unable to thrive, you are not speaking the right language to your advertisers because they're only interested in numbers. So you can't guarantee numbers of unemployed market. And I say that because from experience, I'll give a classic example of a community channel of which I am the acting CEO, which is Soweto TV. It's difficult to sell community channel simply because your prime time is not necessarily your after 6 p.m. Your prime time is midday between 2 and 3. And what does it mean you have high audience between 2 and 3 watching TV? It means they're unemployed, because your 6 p.m. market watches news. They just got off traffic. And if you go to an advertiser and say, hey, I'm from a community channel X, the bulk of my audience are sitting between 1 and 3 p.m. You are talking about people who are not contributing into the economy. They're at home, sitting there watching what? How do I put my brand? If I advertise this sanitizer spray, they won't be able to afford it. So eyeballs or ears cannot translate into value if they're sitting on the wrong time. But if you give me eyeballs after 6 p.m., 7 o'clock, where I know the working class is back at home watching, it means that you have people who just came back from being economically active. So there's a strong relationship between the economic viability of our audience and the content we are giving out to our audience or viewers. We can't detach the two.
No, and that's the great conundrum, really, is it in a way that you could look at podcasts and OTT or whatever it happens to be as being the great liberator, but as you say, with the constraints of data, it's a fiction until we can get past that. And very often we have these types of discussions, and the one screen that's always empty on here is a mobile operator or somebody who can talk about when they're finally going to tell the truth about how much money they make out of data. But Violet, just to put you on the spot, what's the regulator's view on all of this debate? Are you an active player on the pitch, or are you a spectator in the stand watching this battle going on with the mobile operators to give us the data?
Reese, the issue of data, I agree with Thibaut touch on the pricing of data. Pricing of data in South Africa is still a big issue. The regulator is trying to resolve the issue, but however, remember, it's not only the regulator, but then you need to have like the telcos to understand where the regulator is coming from. Because now we have seen with COVID-19 that data is king. You know, we had to force our operators to reduce the data prices so that the students can be able to access online learning. So in terms of, I'm thinking about OTTs and podcasting. Currently in South Africa, as I've said, we don't have any regulations regarding podcasting or even OTTs, because the way we view it is innovation. And at some point as a regulator, you don't want to over-regulate to an extent that you are actually killing innovation in the sector. So even with our regulations, we'll find that we use words like technology, technological neutrality, so that we are saying to whoever we are regulating that go out there, explore other avenues, explore technologies that you can use to bring content to the people. The issue of data that, like I've said, is still a very big issue. The reason why I was saying that community broadcasters, if they are able to podcast, there is nothing stopping them to podcast. And I know Thibaut touched view about the issue around, it seems like we want to encourage community broadcasters to go into field of podcasting. My issue is, if a community broadcaster is able to do it, they can get the audiences through podcasting. I don't think there's anything that should stop them to do it. But the reality is, one, internet penetration in South Africa is very low. The second issue is data prices are still very high. The way I see podcasting working in South Africa is really in the urban areas, unlike in the rural areas.
If you allow me, Ray.
Sure. Yeah, go.
You see, one of the most complex conundrum with the regulator, and I feel their pain, and I wish we could have some kind of a partnership with us being on the private sector side and them being on the regulatory side to say, how do we merge and address this issue? When you have a call to action telling people in communities like Alex Soweto, go innovate, create these podcasts, be part of this innovation. And it's similar to the Taliban saying to all the females that are trying to run out of Afghanistan right now, stay. There's a lot of opportunities for female. We are for emancipation. It is an endless excursion that can only have that can only be to the demise of the people that you want to buy into your message. The problem is, yes, innovation is in the township. There's innovation in Umtata. There's great. I get people every day sending me demos from all parts of the country, and we don't have drought of creativity or innovation in this country. The problem is, here I am creating this amazing property, but my audience cannot consume it because their gateway to accessing this property is data. So we can't accurately say there's a lack of innovation, although there's high growth of innovation, but people are not interested. People are not interested because access is a problem. So the message has to change as to addressing the nucleus of this problem is to say, well, South Africa, we have prioritized certain things like rolling out a vaccine, which is amazing, and we did a great job, and I applaud our government in doing so. But when I look at how we responded to rolling out vaccine and the amount of resources allocated to that kind of message, I think we have capacity to address this big issue of data, because we are the highest unemployed. We're dealing with the highest unemployment in the world, which makes no sense at all, given the amount of industrialization and resource in this country. But I'll tell you where the minds of young people. I have over 40 young people right now in my backyard, like I said, in our studios. If you go to all of them, they come to work, not because they're yearning to be here. They want to be, no, they come to work because they got access to Wi-Fi. Some will even say, don't pay me a salary. I just want to be around your office premises. And that's how desperate our content creators and our audience in terms of consuming and creating content. And we got to deal with that issue to show that there's willingness to create, but there's going to be, if we can merge or we can meet those margins with a great degree of, or dealing with our audience being able to have the means to access that content, it's a futile exercise. So I wish I could tell the community radio stations the truth. And those who are able to be resilient and hope for the curve or hope for a miracle in terms of the intervention with ICASA, Competitions Commission, if that miracle happens now, next time we have this conversation, you'll see a great spike of not just podcast creators, but of advertisers putting money in these townships, putting money around these influencers. The reason why YouTube is successful in South Africa, and the reason why some of the Instagram and Twitter are overtaking the likes of your SABC, because like it or not, social media is also a media channel. SABC is losing audience over Instagram because Instagram has IGTV. The biggest content creators are not guys like me from Santon, from Fourways. It's these funny clips of creative kids in the township that are producing videos that have 100,000 views. Why is Farida, who comes from a commercial or commodifying content, why are they not picking those kids up and putting them with the brands to say, be behind this kid, because we don't know what it took for this type of content to be created. But now that it's out there, someone like this, we surely can commodify their content because they have a captive audience. So there are a lot of great content creators in townships, in communities that will never see the light of day, where their content is reciprocated by the right advertisers or even the regulator meeting them to say, how best can we help you, given the fact that you've demonstrated capacity? And I can give
Peter,
you.
I see you were nodding at that. Is this something that you can empathize with?
I agree, but I also disagree at the same point. We have mentorship programs where we do mentor this young upcoming content creators. We've employed tons of them in here. I mean, half of our workforce is literally under 30 years old, and these are the guys that are out there creating all this content and bring them in. But, in terms of mentorship, I see a trend. They're a little bit impatient, and I take it back to podcasting. I know you were talking about viral videos and Instagram reels and stuff. Whenever a new podcaster, let's say, a bedroom podcaster, 19, 20 years old, they have so much to say. It's not just coming onto the mic and speaking your mind, you have to do research, it's speaking. So there's a craft to it. So how good are you in that craft? Have you read about it? Have you tried to perfect it? How many times have you practiced? You know what I mean? So yes, we do want to propel them to the next level, but we also need to put in a lot of work in practice, and they need to be patient. Your fast podcast or your fast Instagram reel is not the one that's going to shoot you into stardom. You know, you need to be patient enough and very consistent and practice a lot for you to do 10, 15, 5, if you're lucky, 3, for you to propel into the next level. So I agree with you, Thibaut, but I also disagree in terms of why we're not promoting them. We are. It's just that it takes a bit of time to get them to the level that the advertisers want them to be at.
And Indu, do you see some similarities in Nigeria?
Yeah, so that's, fantastic point that Thibaut made, and also Farida. I want to go into the issues of infrastructure, because when we got this email, that's one of the things I pointed out in one of my response answers. Now, data has become slightly cheaper in Nigeria since I got here. I got here in 2009. It's got slightly better, but I haven't seen in the last 5-6 years much, more things getting better. But what I know, like a lot of telecoms operators, they do is they give you packages, because they know, okay, a lot of people are using social media, let's give them the social media package. So in that sense, they've made it cheaper. I don't know. We have MTN here. There's also MTN in South Africa. I'm sure. I'm not sure if they have those packages, but that's what they gave in order to promote young people to get on their services, their ISP services, to be able to get more customers and stuff, because they knew young people were using these things like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and blah, blah. And usually it's around Instagram and Facebook, because data-wise, those are the cheaper ones: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Now, as far as influencers and young and up-and-coming content creators, look, I mean, the truth is, Farida's got it pegged down, right? We have, in our station, we have just one right now, but in the past, we had 3 content creators. So one came in, she was not actually a content creator when she came in. And funny enough, you could kind of look her up. She was on CNN Africa, African Voices, just a month ago or so. So she first came to us, like, I would say, 4 years ago, when we started the station in Lagos, and her name's Okwe, brilliant girl, very, very creative, and all that. She came to us, and initially she was just a voice person for us, and then we, just decided, what, we're very social media. We like to try things on social media. We told her to do something, and she just did like awesome skits for us on social media. And then I looked at her CV. I was like, I realized she was a theater, she studied theater in college, and she has a lot of these creative ideas, and I said, oh, hey, look, why don't you start doing more stuff, right? And then other people were telling her this, and then she just blew up. Like, within a short time, she was one of those people who didn't like have a ton of numbers in terms of followers, but her engagement was insane. So you would have 5,000 followers, right? But you have like an engagement of like 6,000 views, 500 likes, you know what I'm saying? And we're like, you know what, we're gonna pull you in. And so she came in as an intern, and we're like, look, let's pull you in. You get a segment on, in the afternoon, and then eventually we give her a full-time segment, and she's a full-time presenter right now on our station. We had some other content creators. We had a YouTube person come in, but she couldn't balance the YouTube thing with our stuff, so that we couldn't continue with that. And then another person who decided to just focus mainly on his social media stuff. So we have given a lot of people time, but again, the issue that Farida pointed out is, with a lot of them, there is an issue of them being a bit patient and trying to be a bit professional. That is an issue. So if you do give them like a cost podcast thing, or you say, oh, hey, you know what, why don't you go on there? You have 1 hour. It's a collaborative effort. So you can draw, we'll feed off of your audience, we'll get you more audience to your handles. Because what usually happens is, if people find you interesting on air, they're just going to follow you on social media, right? So, and then vice versa, people would now then follow the platform. So we're like, you know what, let's give you this opportunity. You go ahead, you use it. Because you can look at radio presentation is not that different from podcast presentation. It's just you can, you have a bit more freedom to speak your mind on podcasts, but it's still the same thing. You have to have that structure of what you're going to talk about, do your research and things like that. A lot of times people just don't have the patience to do that. So it's only, they don't have the patience to do that, and they don't realize it's not an overnight thing, you know? You have to take your time and actually build that audience, put work into it and all that. Infrastructure-wise, I'm going to go back to that again. I'm in agreement with Tabo. A lot of the, and I feel, I'm speaking from my perspective and what I've seen in Nigeria. I don't know exactly what it's like in South Africa, right? But I've noticed that the government's very slow to pushing for infrastructural development. And I mean, a lot of times, if you talk to these ISPs, which I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to folks in MTN, Glo, Airtel, because I've done subcontracting for them. And they're like, yo, you know what? The truth of the matter is that we do not have help from the government either, right? They make it difficult. I mean, this is Nigeria's own thing. They make it difficult, or they're slow to, you know, embrace this, you know, development of infrastructure to help push, you know, data and things like that. Because if you don't have the infrastructure and the right kind of infrastructure, and you're not growing your infrastructure, over time, you will not then have the ability to provide cheaper data and things like that. Like, look, I'm pretty sure we've been on the same fiber optic without much change. I mean, Lagos is a bit different, but most of the other parts of the country are like really far behind. Lagos is trying to put in a lot of infrastructural things because they're talking about, oh, smart city and all that. But we've been on that till probably last year for the last 7 years. Nothing has changed. Nobody wanted to change anything. And it was now incumbent on, I guess, the government in Lagos to say, you know what, let us try to put in more fiber optic across, you know, the place so people can get more internet and blah, blah, blah. And I remember, and I'm not going to talk much more than this, 4 or 5 years ago, there was no, you couldn't go to a coffee shop and get free internet, but now there are coffee shops with free internet all over the place. So like I said, it's gotten a little bit better. Has it gone at the pace we'd like it to? No. Have the overall regulators been slow, fast to respond? Not as much as we'd like, but, you know, you take it a bit at a time. So, you know.
Thanks, Intu. I mean, one of the things you mentioned early on there was engagement with that lady, the CNN Africa Voices. And one of the questions I've got is, do we, through looking at podcasts, create silos? Because in a sense, this happens as well when you've got followers on Twitter or whatever, I know, that you end up talking to like-minded people. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, that you've got a focused audience, so therefore you know that what you're talking about is of interest to them, hence the high engagement, but you don't have a massive audience. Does that help or conflict, particularly if you're a community radio station? Does that help you, or does it conflict with your mission to try and be as informative as possible to as wide an audience as possible?
I think that, so I will use this little thing and story and try to break that down. I was speaking to an agency, so a couple of agency people about 3 weeks ago, and I said, hey, listen, guys, you know, we need to do more, da, 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 da. And they would say, oh, clients are complaining that things are too stratified right now. Like you have to be more specific about which aspects of your, you know, your programming you want them to advertise in, right? So get specific and send us specific programs and specific people and specific times that you want them to focus on, because they don't want to do block purchases anymore, right? And that's because in a city like Lagos, we have 42 radio stations, right? Which is ridiculous, but we do. Now, coming to community radio, I think the community radios were built for specific people, right? They're not usually built for like the mass audience. They're built for specific people. So for example, in a city like Lagos, you have several different tribes converging into the city, right? You have people who speak different languages. If you set up a radio station for, like, say, the house of people in Lagos, immediately it would be a hit, and it would speak to them specifically. If you did a community radio for the Yoruba people in Lagos, it'd be a hit. Because specifically people who are interested in that will do that, because and they'd be more engaged in it, and they'd be more willing to listen to what you have to say or your advertisers have to say. So I think that stratification and niche is the essence sometimes of some of these mediums, right? For community radio, I think that matters even more because of what it is they're trying. You don't necessarily want to talk to everybody. You don't want to talk to
podcasting would fit right in with that model, really. And
exactly.
And guaranteed the advertiser, we're going to be talking to the people who want you. You've got a message that's going to be important to them.
It simplifies things for advertisers. So I know that if I'm selling milk, right, in a sachet, right, I can talk to people who maybe are listening to this station or this podcast that is in Pidgin or in, whatever, because maybe they are low income people, right, or whatever. But if I'm doing a lifestyle thing, a Mercedes-Benz advertiser could come to me and be like, hey, this audience you have, they seem to be pretty well off and whatever, let's speak to them. So I think that it makes sense to be a bit niche, right, as much as you can. But if you're too niche and you have like maybe 2 people listening to you, may want to, from a commercial point of view, you may want to tweak that. But that is the point of podcasting.
But at least now we're going to have the figures to prove that. It's not just you and your mum that's listening.
Exactly. Well, even if it's you and your mum, you can at least show them that it's you and your mum. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And she buys a lot of milk.
Exactly.
Farida, does that reflect your views as well as to how stratified or not the audience can be or should be through this?
I think the main idea is to segment as much as you can so that it's a more granular target audience, right? Yeah. So we don't sit in the space of community broadcasting, so we would not get into that. Maybe later in the future, but yes, it's definitely something that you should consider. Get down to more granular, where they are, their demographics, what they do, what they like to hear about, so that it's more pivoted towards what they like.
Great. And Tiba, with your Sowetan Alexandrian hats on, would you agree with that?
Sure, without a doubt, yes. Like my brother Ndueza said, the more you tailor your content for a specific group of people, there'll be not just a hockey stick effect in your audience ratings, but in your balance sheet, because then you are able to have conversations around ROIs for clients, and it's the most winning formula. Podcast will always remain that village that you build. And as it grows, the village know that we are not here for anything but specifically this type of content. But I also like to applaud him for saying that not every community is tailored for podcast offering, because the purpose, and my sister Violet will agree with me, one of the key reasons why we have community stations. You must always remember, back before this new age, contemporary, modern society we live in, the purpose of community radio stations, everybody in a community knew each other. And if I could not communicate a passing of Tabo, who is 4 blocks away, or probably he's working in the mines 2-3, and his family is probably from 200-300 kilometers, I'll report it at a community station to say, so-and-so has gone missing, so-and-so is no more. The purpose of a community platform was to address core essential information for the community. It was never for commercial purposes. News on community platform were not of national interest, but it was of a Molefe child or Mokwena or a Johnson has graduated and will be now leaving to study in Oxford. That was great news for the community. People wanted that the people are engaged for such kind of content. But most significantly with traditional radio, three things to make people tune into radio, and podcasts necessarily don't offer them. One is competitions. Podcast is not live, it's pre-recorded. So when you're on live radio, people are there to, one, take what can they win, what can they take? Two, call-ins. Podcast does not offer that opportunity to call in because it's a pre-record. Three was obviously the great conversations and the great music. But in the day of YouTube, YouTube has made a lot of platforms like MTV irrelevant, because soon as I see a song is out, the artist I'm following is going to put the song on YouTube or Instagram. So community broadcasting is centered around those three pillars, where we knew for a fact that anything that I needed, if I couldn't get it to the police or report it to the nearest government institution, I'm going to put this matter before the community media platform, and they will help, they will best help in extending it or letting it reach the right kind of societal intervention if it needs government. But to assume that every community station can be remodeled for podcast and any kind of innovation, we need to be careful in making that assumption. Because a community of Alex is not the same as a community of Rosebank or Santon. Yeah. Far different. They couldn't be bothered. Like today, one of the key things that my aunt who lives in the Val listens to that particular station is so that she knows what time is load shedding, because she's not going to get that on ENCA. And load shedding, for those who are listening across the world, is one of the problems we have with scheduled out, electricity cuts from ESCOM, from our power supply. So there are specific tailored content information that your audience will religiously follow this community platform. And once we take that away and try to think that innovation is good for our people, and we take away such kind of content, we are killing the purpose of that platform. Because ICASA will tell you, as a regulator, when they give you that license, these are your quotas. This is what your license stipulates, and you should adhere to such. We cannot always make the assumption that innovation is good for some of these community platforms, that if we created podcast offering parallel to their traditional offering, it'll work. No. And I'm not the one to make that call, but I really think that we have to do the right research in dealing with, or in understanding truly which group of people is prepared from a community to evolve into a podcast offering. And once that research is quantified and is based on facts, sure, innovation is inevitable.
No, that's a great thing to head towards winding up the session. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to go around and ask for some final words. Violet, just taking up what Tiwa was saying there, as the regulator, what are you expecting people to do with podcasting? What are your hopes and what are your fears from a regulatory point of view?
From the regulatory point of view, as I've said, we do not regulate podcasting. We do not regulate online media. We don't regulate internet television. We don't regulate those. Hence, I was saying, as a regulator, if a community broadcaster, I will still say, if a community broadcaster is of the view that they have done their research, 2, they have the relevant audience, 3, they believe that they can make it in the podcasting, there is nothing that should stop them not to venture into such adventures. We should. And
would you encourage them to do that, given your mission?
Yes, hence I'm saying.
Yeah.
For me, the way I look at podcasting, even radio as a whole, you know who your audiences are, you know what your market is. For instance, if it's a community broadcaster, maybe in 4 ways. In 4 ways, you have people who have money, so they can afford to buy data. They have Wi-Fi at their homes. And if there's a community radio station that wants to stream their content on podcasting, they should be allowed to do that. And even if it's a community in Alexander, one of the things that we now do as ICASA, before we are licensed a community broadcaster, there's a process that they need to follow. For instance, they have to show that they do have a market. They have the audiences. They will be able to get advertisers. Then we pre-register them. Once we have seen that they can survive in this environment, then they're then invited to be registered fully and be given a registration certificate. Hence, I'm saying we should not discourage people from being innovative. If I know who my market is, if I know that I can be able through podcasting, even though I'm a community broadcaster, I can be able to attract advertisers. I should be allowed to do that. Hence, as ICASA, we have taken a step back approach to see how online media is going, how OTTs are going, even podcasting, before we can even say, no, you can or you cannot do it.
Super. Thank you, Violet. That's some good words. Ndu, anything you'd like to pass on to our participants? Words of wisdom, words of stupidity, lessons you've learned?
Yeah, a few words of stupidity, but no, I'm just joking. Well, I mean, I think that, so I was going to ask this question, actually. I was going to ask a question first and see if we can, I was specifically going to ask Thabo this question. Do you think that, we were talking about community radio and all that, and you said that there are some people who just will not get engaged in podcasting. So let's look in the future, 30 years, right? And all the people who are into, all the young people now become much older. How do you see community radio in 30 years? And do you think that at that point in time, everybody will embrace podcasting or not?
I always
just
know
look
that
at us in 30 years, and just, just use that and see the space that community radio occupies, and even occupies for people who are in less fortunate areas, which a lot of times it goes for. What do you see? How do you see that in 30 years? I mean, nobody can predict the future, but I'm just asking that as a question.
I'm going to try to narrow 30, if you allow me, to sooner than 30. I think
Okay.
It takes conversations like we just had. I applaud BMA and all the group to put this conversation together, because it makes sense to have the regulator, to have yourself, content creators, to have Farida, to stimulate change. And I really think the acceleration of this change is happening at a pace which I really see it producing tangible results and meeting grassroots level people in community up to affluency. And all that is to say, how do we accelerate this intervention of the networks, understanding that information is so essential, and there are great creators of information who have been hindered the opportunity to play simply because of this barrier to entry. And when we accelerate this access to data and we keep having the regulators, the network in this conversation, I generally see a bigger, a more transformative society where community, even the least unemployed person in a community like Alexandra or Soweto or in Lagos will appreciate burning data for engaging this kind of a podcast, simply because it nurtures something, it plows back into their well-being. They don't just see it as a one-way stream where they're listening, but there's something about this particular podcast or content that adds to their well-being. So there's a need for us to really keep on having more of these kind of engagement to accelerate that change. I applaud Nigerians for what they've done in terms of independent influencers who said, I'm not gonna go to Lagos FM or go to SoundCloud for me to have my breakthrough. You got people who from Lagos are on Apple Radio, and they have audience in Nigeria and outside Nigeria. And one of the models I want every community in the world to borrow from the wisdom of Nigerian content creators is to stop making content for people in your backyard. Because once it's online, you have this plethora of audience that you don't know where they are and who they are. But if your message is that punchy, is that cutting edge, you could have a fan in Thailand who has influence to say, actually, I'm going to drop free data for all our audiences. So big shout out to your content creators and artists like your Burna Boys, who don't need to sell in Nigeria to be relevant in the world, who don't need to have Nigerian listeners to have an audience. They have the world as their audience, the world as their oyster. So yes, community channel, the word community should not limit the extent to which you tailor your content. You know, it's just an address, it's just location, but good audience has everybody as a target audience.
Good community doesn't necessarily need to be bricks and mortar. It's
not at all.
It's
Not at
an
all.
area of interest.
Not at all.
Yeah, like you said before, you create your village essentially, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just say this one little thing and then I'll pass it on. I think that the future is digital content and podcasts, and I think that broadcast media will still have a place in Africa in general. I believe so. It will still have a very strong place, but I think that we will definitely be, there will be a stronger place in the next 5 to 10 years of Africa. I mean, not just Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, despite all these hindrances we have from, infrastructure level, cost of data and whatnot. We will get better. And I mean, you'll have more young people coming in who are more ready to, get involved and do it, on a professional level, because they'll see what people have done before and say, okay, you know what, let me do it like this, and let me come in and put, get my hands dirty and get this thing going. So I think podcasting for me is the future. That's why I'm looking into it. I'm sure that's why Farida is looking into it as well. And Tabo is already ahead of the curve as far as I'm concerned.
Great, thanks. And Farida, I guess you just got the baton thrown at you there, if not hurled, to have the last word, because I see how our host has turned up to tell us it's time to go home.
Yeah. And I agree with the two gentlemen by far. I just think that there's need to craft the art of storytelling, and get down to the subculture and the community. And, I think would get to a point where the bedroom producer, podcaster, can now compete with large organizations that have production budget and, have a lot of content and a lot of things that work in our favor. So the future is looking bright.
Super. Thank you very much, Yonela. I think we can hand back to you with a minute still left in the bag. So thank you, everybody, for a stimulating conversation. I was trying hard not to say too much, which is unusual for me. So thank you very much for not giving me the space to speak. And to all of you, have a great day. And also to all of our listeners, have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Okay,
no, you've
Yonela,
literally handled everything extremely well, Reese. I mean, you did also have input right at the beginning, but the conversation was extremely informative. Thank you to all the panelists. I think, with the vision that BMA has with Tugwana Media, the 1 hour, 30 minutes was literally not enough, because there is really so much to learn. And I think we do need to have really more of these, because there is not really a long way to go, but we are moving forward. And as a continent, we need to really embrace the change and also give advice and assurance to the youngsters that are in the podcasting and more of the social media space to actually be confident in their craft, because you know what, with where the world is going, everything is going digital, so it needs to be embraced. We need to get the telcos on board, because I mean, I think it's been mentioned numerous times that the data issue is a hindrance in the growth of digital media. So telcos need to be on board, regulators as well as government. So as a platform and also as a continent, I think we do need to make more and also strategize on how we actually address the government. So whichever country gets it right first, please share it with us so that we can grow together. Thank you so much to everyone, to the panelists, Farida, Thibaut, Ndweza, Violet. Thank you so much for taking the time to give us your knowledge, to share your knowledge, and to the audience for joining us. Thank you, Reese. Really, thank you for moderating the session extremely well, and we have kept to the time.
Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.